It's 2:47 in the morning, and you're wide awake for the third time tonight. Your feet hit the cold floor, you shuffle to the bathroom half asleep, and as you climb back into bed, you think the same thing you thought last night, and the night before that. Something is wrong with me. So you do what most people do. You start drinking less water in the evening. Maybe you cut it off completely after 6 o'clock. And yet somehow, you're still waking up just as often, sometimes worse. If that sounds familiar, I want you to hear something that might surprise you. The problem was never how much water you were drinking. It's when you were drinking it. And the fix that actually works is something almost nobody over 50 has ever been told. I'm going to walk you through exactly what it is, because I've seen this pattern in my patients so many times that I could practically predict it before they finish describing their symptoms. Stick with me, because by the time we're done, you'll understand something about your own body that most people go their entire lives never learning. And it could be the difference between another exhausting night and finally sleeping straight through until morning. Waking up once or twice a night to use the bathroom is one of the most common complaints I hear from patients over 50, and it's also one of the most misunderstood. Most people assume it's just something that comes with getting older, an inevitable trade-off like needing reading glasses, and there's some truth buried in that assumption. But the frequency a lot of people are dealing with, 3 times, 4 times, sometimes more, isn't something you have to just accept. What's frustrating is that most of the advice circulating out there, stop drinking after dinner, cut back on fluids in general, sounds logical on the surface but is often incomplete, and sometimes it actually makes things worse. Today I want to walk you through why this happens as we age, the single biggest mistake I see people make with their water intake, some hidden habits that are quietly working against you, the method I actually recommend to my own patients, a few warning signs that mean it's time to see a doctor, and finally, how to put all of this together into a simple nighttime routine you can start using tonight. Before we get into any of that, let me properly introduce myself. I'm Dr. Andrea Reyes, and I've spent years treating adults dealing with urinary and bladder health concerns. A huge number of them, people over 50 who are exhausted from broken sleep and quietly worried that something serious is going on. I want to be upfront about something important. This video is for educational purposes. It isn't a replacement for personalized medical care, and if you're dealing with new symptoms or symptoms that are getting worse, especially things like pain, blood in your urine, fever, or a sudden change in how often you're going, please talk to your own doctor. Nighttime urination can sometimes be a sign of something else going on underneath the surface. Conditions like diabetes, heart issues, or prostate problems. So what I'm sharing today is general guidance around water habits, not a diagnosis for any individual situation. Let me tell you about a patient of mine, because I have a feeling her story is going to sound a little too familiar. Her name was Eleanor, 64 years old, a retired school teacher living on her own, generally in good health aside from mild high blood pressure that she managed with medication. Eleanor took her health seriously. She carried a water bottle with her everywhere, sipping on it throughout the day and well into the evening because she'd read somewhere that staying hydrated was good for her heart and her kidneys. She was, by every measure, doing the right thing. And yet she was waking up 3, sometimes 4 times a night, and it was wearing her down. She came into my office exhausted, a little irritable and increasingly anxious that something was wrong with her body. She'd already tried the obvious fix, cutting off water completely after 5 in the evening, but that left her thirsty and dry-mouthed, and she was still waking up just as often, sometimes even more. When she sat across from me describing all of this, I knew almost immediately what was going on, because I'd seen it so many times before. Eleanor represents something I see constantly in my practice, health-conscious people doing everything they think is right, but missing the one variable that actually matters most. And her story is going to come up again as we go, because watching how she turned things around might be the clearest way to understand what I'm about to explain. To understand what was really happening with Eleanor, we first need to understand why this becomes more common as we get older in the first place. There's a hormone in your body called antidiuretic hormone, and its job, among other things, is to help your kidneys concentrate urine at night so you produce less of it while you sleep. As we age, the production of this hormone tends to decline, which means your body simply doesn't hold back nighttime urine production the way it used to in your 30s or 40s. On top of that, your bladder itself changes over time, becoming a little less elastic and holding a bit less volume before it signals that it's full. Think of it like a balloon that's been blown up and deflated many times over the years. It still works, but it doesn't stretch quite the way it once did. There's a third piece to this that most people have genuinely never heard, and it surprised Eleanor when I explained it to her. During the day, if you're sitting for long periods, or if you have even mild issues with circulation in your legs, fluid can gradually pool in your lower legs and ankles. You might not even notice it beyond your socks leaving a slight mark, or your shoes feeling a touch tighter by evening. But once you lie down at night, gravity stops working against that fluid, and your body reabsorbs it back into your bloodstream. Your kidneys then have to process that extra fluid, which means more urine production overnight, right when you're trying to sleep. Research on aging and nighttime urination consistently points to this combination: hormonal changes, reduced bladder capacity, and daytime fluid shifting as one of the most common and most overlooked drivers of the problem. When I explained this to Eleanor, she actually laughed a little, because she'd noticed her ankles looked slightly puffy by the end of most days, and had always just chalked it up to being on her feet too much. She'd never once connected it to her nighttime bathroom trips. I want to be clear about something here too. None of this means your body is failing you. This is physiology, not a personal failure, and understanding it is the first step toward actually fixing it. Now, that leg fluid mechanism I just mentioned connects directly to the mistake I see more than almost any other, and it was the biggest piece of Eleanor's puzzle. Most people, without realizing it, either spread their water intake evenly throughout the day, or, even more commonly, backload it toward the evening. Think about it. During a busy day, you might not drink much at all until you finally sit down after dinner, and that's when you reach for a large glass of water or a cup of tea while watching television, because that's finally when you have a moment to relax. It feels responsible, it feels healthy, but it's actually working against you. Here's why. Your kidneys take a few hours to fully process a significant fluid load. If you're drinking heavily in the 3 or 4 hours before bed, that water is still being filtered and turned into urine during the exact hours you're trying to sleep. Combine that with the declining hormone levels we just talked about, and you've got what I'd describe as a perfect storm for waking up repeatedly. I like to compare it to trying to empty a dishwasher while someone keeps loading more dishes into it. The problem isn't the total number of dishes, it's that you're trying to empty and fill it at the same time. When I sat down and had Eleanor walk me through a typical day, it turned out nearly half of her total daily water intake happened after 4 in the afternoon. She wasn't overdrinking overall. She was simply drinking at the wrong time, essentially rewarding herself in the evening for a productive day. This is exactly why the common advice to just stop drinking after 6 p.m. often backfires. It sounds logical, but it doesn't address the real problem, which is that the person is likely underhydrated during the day and overloaded at night. And there's a real risk to that restriction approach too. Chronic mild dehydration in older adults is associated with confusion, dizziness, a higher risk of falls, kidney stones, and even urinary tract infections, which can honestly be more dangerous than an extra trip to the bathroom. So I want to reframe the goal for you the same way I reframed it for Eleanor. This was never about drinking less water. It's about drinking the same water, just distributed better across your day. Water timing was a major piece of what was happening with Eleanor, but it wasn't the whole picture. And there were a few other things hiding in her daily routine that she genuinely never suspected. Caffeine and alcohol are both diuretics, meaning they increase how much urine your body produces, but they're also bladder irritants, meaning they make your bladder more sensitive and prone to signaling urgency even when it isn't truly full. If either of those show up in the afternoon or evening, they compound everything we've already discussed. But it goes beyond obvious drinks. A bowl of soup before bed counts as fluid. So does a slice of watermelon or an orange eaten as an evening snack. Even a bowl of ice cream contributes more liquid than people realize. I like to describe bladder irritants as turning up the sensitivity on an alarm system, so it starts going off at a smaller volume than it normally would need to. There's also sodium to consider. A salty dinner causes your body to retain fluid in the hours afterward, and that fluid often gets released later that night as urine, adding yet another layer to the problem. General clinical guidance consistently links reducing evening caffeine and alcohol with measurable improvement in nighttime urination, and it's one of the easier changes to make once you're aware of it. I do want to add one important caution here. If you're on a diuretic medication, often prescribed for blood pressure, please don't adjust the timing of that medication on your own. Talk to the doctor who prescribed it, because timing can matter, but it needs to be individualized. When I went through this list with Eleanor, she got quiet for a second, then admitted that her evening routine included herbal tea and often a small dessert, frequently something fruit-based, because it felt like a healthy way to end her day. She'd had no idea either of those was adding to her overnight fluid load. Before I give you the full method I recommend, I want you to take a second and think honestly about your own evenings. Is there a cup of tea, a glass of wine, a bowl of soup that's become part of your nightly routine without you ever connecting it to your sleep? If you're watching this and something just clicked for you, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. How many times are you typically waking up at night, and have you already tried the drink less water approach yourself? I read through these comments, and it helps me know what to cover in future videos. Now let's get into exactly what I recommend to my patients, including Eleanor, because this is the part that actually makes the difference. The goal is not to reduce your total daily water intake. Your body still needs that hydration. The goal is to shift when you're drinking it. As a general guideline, I recommend aiming to get roughly 70 to 80% of your daily fluid intake in before mid-afternoon, then gradually tapering through the early evening and keeping the final 2 to 3 hours before bed to small sips only, rather than full glasses, unless you need water to take a medication. I like to describe this as treating your hydration like a savings account that you fill up in the morning, rather than a debt you're trying to pay off right before bed. In practice, this might look like a full glass of water as soon as you wake up, steady sipping through your workday or your morning routine, tapering off after dinner, and just a small amount if you truly need it later on. One mistake I want to warn you about directly is trying to make up for an underhydrated day by chugging water in the evening because you suddenly remembered you hadn't had enough. That's the exact backloading pattern we already talked about, and it undoes the benefit. I also want to be clear that this isn't about extreme restriction. You still need adequate total hydration, especially in hot weather, and if you have certain medical conditions, particularly involving your heart or kidneys, or if you're on specific medications, please individualize this with your own doctor rather than following a generic rule. When Eleanor adopted this pattern, she moved her water bottle refills earlier in the day and switched her afternoon tea to something she had right after lunch instead of after dinner. Within about 2 weeks, she noticed a real difference. This approach helps the vast majority of people I see. But before we get to putting together a full routine, I think it's important to talk about when nighttime urination is a sign of something more than a habit that needs adjusting. Most of the time, what we've covered so far accounts for the vast majority of nighttime bathroom trips in adults over 50. But there are certain signs that mean it's time to see a doctor rather than simply adjusting your water schedule. If you notice a sudden increase in how often you're going, pain or a burning sensation during urination, blood in your urine, fever, unexplained weight loss, or excessive thirst alongside frequent urination, that last combination in particular can sometimes point toward diabetes and deserves proper evaluation. Significant swelling in your legs or ankles combined with shortness of breath can be a sign of a heart-related fluid issue rather than simple daytime pooling. And for men, an enlarged prostate is a common contributor to nighttime urination that a doctor can properly assess and treat. I like to compare this to a smoke alarm in your kitchen. Most of the time it goes off because you're cooking, a false alarm, nothing to worry about. But every so often, it's telling you something that genuinely needs attention. The distinction I draw is this: if you're waking up once or twice, it's manageable, and adjusting your water timing helps. That's very likely a habit issue. If you're waking up 5 or more times, in pain, or noticing you're unusually thirsty all the time, that's worth a conversation with your doctor. I never want you to self-diagnose based on a video, mine included. In Eleanor's case, once we went through her history together, there were no red flags. Her situation was driven by habits, not an underlying condition, which is actually the case for most of my patients. But I always screen for these other causes first with anyone who comes to me with this complaint, because ruling those out matters more than anything else we've discussed today. So let's bring this together into a simple nighttime routine you can actually start tonight. Front load your hydration earlier in the day, aiming for that 70 to 80% before mid-afternoon we talked about. Keep dinner on the lighter side when it comes to sodium, since a salty meal sets you up for fluid retention and release overnight. Try to have your last caffeine or alcohol by mid-afternoon rather than with dinner. About 15 to 20 minutes before you get into bed, sit with your legs elevated, even just propped up on a pillow or an ottoman. This helps your body redistribute that pooled leg fluid before you lie down, rather than all at once while you're trying to sleep, which ties directly back to that mechanism I explained earlier. Keep your last hour or two before bed to minimal sips only, and make a habit of using the bathroom right before you get into bed, even if you don't feel a strong urge, just to start with an empty bladder. I want to be honest with you, don't try to change everything at once. Pick 1 or 2 of these to start with this week and layer in the rest gradually over the next couple of weeks. And if you've made these changes and you're still struggling, that's exactly the point where a conversation with your doctor becomes worthwhile rather than continuing to adjust things on your own. When Eleanor put this full routine together, gradually, not overnight, her nighttime trips went from 3 or 4 down to 0 or 1 on most nights. She told me during a follow-up visit that she felt more rested than she had in years. And honestly, just as importantly, she felt like she understood her own body again instead of feeling betrayed by it. Eleanor is doing well these days. A few weeks after we adjusted her routine, she came back in for a follow-up, and she looked like a different person. Rested, calm, no longer anxious about what her body was doing to her at night. What I want you to take away from her story is this. Nighttime urination as you get older isn't about drinking less water. It's about drinking smarter and earlier. It's also worth paying attention to the hidden contributors: caffeine, alcohol, salty meals, even fruit and soup in the evening, and simple habits like elevating your legs before bed can genuinely help. And above everything else, if something feels off, if you're noticing pain, unusual thirst, or symptoms that don't fit the pattern we discussed, please see your doctor rather than trying to manage it entirely on your own. If you're watching this and thinking about where to start, don't try to overhaul your entire routine tonight. Just pick one thing. Maybe it's moving your afternoon tea earlier or elevating your legs before bed, and give it a genuine week or 2 before judging whether it's working. Waking up repeatedly at night after 50 is common, but common doesn't mean you have to simply live with it. Small, informed changes can make a real difference in how rested you feel. If this helped you understand your own nights a little better, I'd love for you to subscribe for more videos like this one and let me know in the comments which change you're planning to try first.